Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And let me just thank the Institute for making my visit possible. I'm feeling a bit intimidated in this room, I have to say. It feels a bit like a church. So I will keep my language clean and only be polite. I do feel at home in Northern Ireland. Like my country, yours is very beautiful, hospitable, but also fundamentally damaged by its pasts. And I use the word pasts in the plural deliberately, because always we are dealing with multiple pasts. It's not just the Troubles, it's centuries here in Northern Ireland. And it's also the last 15 years. And this is a lesson we're learning in South Africa. We tend to talk only about apartheid, but not about the colonial past and the pre-colonial pasts. And we don't talk much about the last 20 years. So why is memory work so important? I've written a paper for today, and the Institute can make this available to everybody. I just want to highlight a few points to stimulate discussion. And those points are all attempting to address this question. Why, after oppression, after troubles, is memory work so important? In my view, it is important because it gives us the promise of a liberatory future. It's not about the past, it's about the future. And I want to not quite quote, I'm paraphrasing here, my favorite philosopher on this question, Jacques Derrida. No justice seems possible or thinkable without the principle of some responsibility before the ghosts of the dead, be they victims of war, political, or other kinds of violence. Before the ghosts of the living who are damaged by violences past and present, and before the ghosts of those who are not yet born. So these ghosts of those who are dead, of those who are living, and of those not yet born, call us to remember. In South Africa between 1990 and 94, this is now our formal transition from apartheid to democracy, Nelson Mandela frequently told us that it was time to close the book on the past. We have to forget our divisions and our enmities, and we now need to look to the future. And yet, as head of our first democratic government, he introduced a policy of building the future by reckoning with the past. And the rationale for that policy was that in order to find a liberatory forgetting, we would first have to do the difficult remembering. 20 years later, we know so little about the past. So many voices are still disavowed. There are so many secrets, so many lies. Only a handful of people have been punished for their crimes. Relatively few have found healing, and we remain a profoundly damaged society. So, why? Why are we in this position despite so much memory work? We've had state historiography, we've had numerous state-funded oral history projects, new curricula for schools, museums, new archives. We've been awash in memory. Many new foundations have been established in the names of struggle veterans. It's almost a case of one comrade, one foundation. And yet, what I'm saying to you is that the really difficult memory work hasn't been done. Why? Just a few words about the broader strategy first, and then I'll come directly to that question. The strategy for reckoning with the past that was implemented under Nelson Mandela's government had three primary prongs. The first one was nation building, and he was personally deeply committed to this and arguably focused more on nation building than anything else during those 5 years. So it was a new flag, a new national anthem with elements of the old one, elements of the liberation movement's anthem. It was 11 official languages, and so on. Arguably, that was not very successful. Its capacity to secure traction was dependent on success with the other two prongs. But also, one could argue that that kind of nation building always has a shadow. And in our case, we see today what I would argue is the shadow of nation building, namely a deep suspicion of strangers, foreigners, and a terrible inversion of apartheid racial logic, where today in South Africa, the darker you are, the more likely you are to be identified as coming from somewhere in northern Africa or north of South Africa. And so we have what we call a problem of xenophobia, the shadow of nation building. So that was the first prong. The second prong was to put in place special instruments for redress and reparation. Now, around the world, we're most well known, I think, for our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it was one of many special instruments. And I'll name just a few to give you a sense of the diversity. We have a land restitution process. We have a special pensions process, so people who contributed to the struggle are eligible for these pensions. We have black economic empowerment. And I could go on listing these many, many instruments. Some of them have been reasonably successful, but overall, they've been too slow. And I'll give you one example. There's, in terms of land, our objective in 1994 was, by 2014, which is now, to have redistributed 30% of white-owned commercial farming land to black owners. Now, official estimates are that we've got to about 8 or 9%. Activists in the sector are saying it's much lower, maybe 4 or 5%. Far too slow. In other words, people are angry. They carry rage. And then the third prong for reckoning with the past was to restructure the economy to benefit the previously disadvantaged and to redistribute wealth, skills, and opportunity. And I would argue this is where we have failed most significantly. It's perhaps hard for you to understand this, but South Africa today is more unequal than it was in 1994. And in terms of international measures of inequality, we are the most unequal society on earth today. So, in South Africa today, as in Northern Ireland, you can see it physically. You can see the imprint of the past. Apartheid realities are still very much with us. And our people are running out of patience. So what lessons have we learnt about memory work in the last 20 years? I should rephrase that because I don't think we've learnt these lessons yet. What lessons should we have learnt? And I just want to highlight 6 of them, which I feel have a particular relevance to the context I find myself in today and the challenges facing your country. The first one has to do with this concept of healing. In international transitional justice discourse, there is a dominant model for how societies which have been through traumatic pasts find healing. And in South Africa, we adopted very robustly this model. And today in South Africa, we still have this myth that 22,000 victims of gross human rights violations came to the Truth Commission. They told their stories, their experiences were affirmed, and they found healing. But the reality is that we haven't bothered to go back to them and ask them if indeed they have found healing. In my experience with what the Truth Commission called victims, the majority didn't. And so we carry a weight in that space. For many people, telling that story reopened the wound. And what we are grappling with now is, how do you create a space for stories to be told again and again? And every time a story gets told, it changes. It grows. And things that couldn't be talked about 5 years ago can now be perhaps named. And in another 5 years, perhaps we can then start to go into the really difficult spaces. I hope this is a lesson that we're learning in South Africa, is that it's not about the one-off, tell the story and move on. It's about a continuing space for storytelling. Second lesson, very closely connected to the first one, is that the model of healing that we embraced in South Africa was very much about individuals finding healing. But we all live in community. And in South Africa, we haven't been very good at creating community containers for these narratives. In fact, I don't know of a single project post the Truth and Reconciliation Commission which has involved working with the stories that emerged through the Truth Commission in a particular community to broaden the network of stories, to begin to connect them one to another, and to build within communities ownership of those painful pasts. Let me give you an example of of a community-based project that I feel addresses this challenge and gives us hope that this can be replicated in other communities. I don't know if you've heard of a town in South Africa called Worcester. In 1996, 5 white right-wingers planted 2 bombs in a black shopping center. And about 60, 70 people were badly injured, half a dozen killed. This was never addressed by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But 3 or 4 years ago, one of the bombers approached an NGO and asked for assistance in enabling him to apologize to the community in Worcester. And what's emerged since then is a process where the community has taken ownership of this process. And a number of related memory projects have grown out of it. And it's now addressing broader contexts to what happened in 1996. It's addressing longer histories in the community. It's a project owned by the community. It wasn't generated by a transitional justice instrument like the Truth Commission. It's supported by both national government, local government, and civil society. We need more of these projects. Third lesson, so I'm nearly halfway. In the memory work that we do, we have to find ways of bringing hostile voices into conversation. And dominant voices into conversation with disavowed voices. I'll give you an example of what I mean in both areas. In South Africa, we have a monument called the Voortrekker Monument, which still today represents an Afrikaner nationalist narrative, unashamedly. And it's located on a hill just across a valley from another hill which has a new monument called the Freedom Park. And Freedom Park represents very strongly a post-apartheid narrative, the glorious struggle against apartheid and the finding of reconciliation. They're on 2 hills looking at one another. One has a wall of remembrance to those who died during the struggle, for the struggle. The other has a wall of remembrance for the soldiers who died in the South African army. The challenge I'm suggesting to you is, how do we bring those into conversation with one another? In terms of dominant voices and disavowed voices, there are certain stories we don't want to tell in South Africa. We don't want to remember that by 1990, the great majority of police were black. We don't want to remember the stories of township councillors, their experiences. I'll name one just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about here. Sharpeville, I'm sure that's a name that you recognize. There are many Sharpeville stories. One of them that we don't like to talk about today has to do with a councillor called Jacob Dlamini. So these councils were appointed in the early 1980s by the apartheid state as a way of trying to reform the system. And the liberation movements regarded anyone who served on these structures as collaborators. Jacob Dlamini was dragged out of his house in 1984 and murdered in front of his wife and children. Are we telling that story and the many, many stories like that today? Are we trying to make sense of it? These are disavowed voices. And the challenge I'm suggesting to you is to bring those voices into conversation with the dominant voices of today. The fourth lesson. Like many countries, and I don't know enough about Northern Ireland yet to know if you find yourselves in this category. But in South Africa, we too easily fell into the dominant transitional justice discourses in terms of which people are very clearly and easily labeled. You're a victim, you're a perpetrator, you're an oppressor, you're a beneficiary, you're a survivor. We have to find ways of disturbing that kind of easy labeling. We have to understand that very few people fall simply into one of those categories. If you take someone like Jacob Dlamini, he grew up as a black South African in a township. He was oppressed. He was a victim of the system, but then he became a councillor. So he became an oppressor. He became part of the system. And then he was murdered in front of his family, and he became a victim. And I would argue that most of us would find ourselves falling into a number of these categories. And it's when we foster that complexity and honor that space that memory work begins to enable liberatory futures. A fifth lesson is that you have to work very hard to reach the youth. In my country, we've done a lot of work in this area, but most of it has been relatively unsuccessful. Our youth, and I'm talking about people who are younger than 20, are tired of listening to struggle era stories. They're tired of being taught about what happened in the past. They are impatient with a didactic approach. They are uncomfortable with celebratory accounts of the glorious struggle against oppression. Now, I don't have an answer here, but what I'm suggesting is that reaching the youth is absolutely critical. And it's a challenge. How do you engage them in a way that is liberatory for them? How do you engage them in ways where they are teaching you as much as you are teaching them? And then a final lesson, the sixth one. It has to do with the importance of accountability. Now, I know in Northern Ireland you don't like to talk about amnesty. In my country, we embraced the concept of amnesty. So here was the trade-off. If you are a perpetrator of a gross human rights violation, you can get amnesty, and that is amnesty from both criminal and civil litigation. If you fulfill 3 criteria. Firstly, you make a full disclosure. Secondly, you can demonstrate a political motive. And thirdly, you fulfill the principle of proportionality. Your action was proportional to the political objective. So we had about 7,000 applications for amnesty, and just over 1,000 applications were successful. This was in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Since the end of the Commission's work, I might be wrong by 1 or 2 court cases, but as far as I know, there have only been 2 prosecutions. And there is no indication from the state that there will be systematic prosecutions of those who failed to get amnesty. In other words, effectively, in South Africa, we have implemented a blanket amnesty. I think we're paying a terrible price for that. In terms of cultures of impunity. Now, I don't know what the answer to this question is. So do you prosecute everybody who failed to get amnesty? So we're still talking about thousands of people. How do you do that? What is it going to do to your country? Or do you choose a few symbolic cases, as is being done in Cambodia? I'm not sure, but I am sure that we South Africans, and I'm sure it's true of you in Northern Ireland, we humans perhaps, we need at the very least, firstly, that those in power today acknowledge their complicity in things that happened in the past. Secondly, we need access to the public record of the past. And thirdly, we need individuals to tell us what they remember today about what they did. I'm talking about the torturers, the assassins, the spies, and so on. In my country, access to records is a major issue. You might have picked up on some of the debates that have been going on in the last 2-3 years, where our government is trying to introduce a new Secrecy Act, even with a constitution that enshrines the principle of freedom of information, and we have a Promotion of Access to Information Act, which technically is a very good piece of legislation, but in practice, you have to have a lot of money to force records into the public domain. I'll give you one example. Does the name Dulcie September mean anything to anyone here? She was the ANC representative in France in the 1980s, and she was assassinated. There was an investigation undertaken by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. None of the documentation related to that investigation was put in the public domain. And the record itself was removed from the Truth Commission and was in the custody of our National Intelligence Agency. An NGO called the South African History Archive, I at the time was director of this small NGO, was approached by the family of Dulcie September asking for assistance to get access to the investigation file. We put in the Promotion of Access to Information Act request, and it was refused. We appealed, that was refused. To this day, the family hasn't seen what's in that file. And it's a question that I ask everyone I encounter here in Northern Ireland is, how are you doing in relation to access to those kinds of records? I mean, these records often are not let's say unproblematic. Intelligence files are always full of disinformation. They're always full of information that can be very damaging to individuals. So it's not about, in a gung-ho way, saying, well, everything must be made available. But we simply have to find a way and put in place instruments that ensure that your point of departure is that everything is made available to those who have an interest in the content of these records, unless there are very good reasons for restricting access. And we still have a long way to go in our country to develop those kinds of cultures of transparency. So I'm going to leave it there. These are lessons that we're beginning to learn in South Africa. The ghosts that I mentioned at the outset, the ghosts of those who died, the ghosts of those not yet born, but especially the ghosts of those still living, the ones who have not yet been able to befriend, to make peace with the self before the violation, before the damage was done. These are the ghosts that call us to do this memory work, as difficult as it is. A luta continua. Thank you.